I've been planning on doing this for a while now, and I was originally going to do it on TikTok, but I think in order to get into the details of it, YouTube is a better platform. I'm going to give a bit of a breakdown of each of the political parties in Ireland, and I'm going to do a bit of an analysis on where they've been, where they are now, and what the future looks like for them. And before anybody asks, throughout this series of videos I will do almost every political party, including the nationalist ones. And I'm going to do this based on fact, statistics and reports. So if that's the type of thing that's going to make you fly off in a fit of rage and start leaving death threats in the comments, then maybe turn on the Teletubbies or something. I'm going to start off with Fine Gael. And to get a broader sense of where their base is, I'm going to be using a report from David Madden, who's a professor of economics at UCD. Now, David's report finds that those on higher incomes are more likely to vote for Fine Gael. It also shows that their voter base is predominantly in the older age bracket. And with this information, we can start to piece together the type of people who vote for Fine Gael. And whilst not every rich elderly person will vote for them, it does give us a good indication. So why does all of this matter? Well, in order to get an idea of where a party's going in the future, we have to do a couple of things first. First, we have to see how they've performed up to now. And in the case of Fine Gael, they've had a very stable history, going back as far as the 1930s. And whilst they mightn't have been as politically successful as Fianna Fáil, they haven't done too bad either. But we really start to see the rise of Fine Gael in 2011, which was a direct result of the financial crash that Fianna Fáil presided over. In that election, Fine Gael had their best result ever, and were the first party in over 100 years to knock Fianna Fáil off the top spot. They received over 800,000 first preference votes, with a vote share of over 36%, thus becoming the largest party in the Dáil and the one to lead the next government. However, in the space of just one government term, Fine Gael, alongside the Labour Party, introduced wildly unpopular and harsh austerity measures which saw them crumble in the 2016 election, down from 36% in 2011 to just 25%. And since then, Fine Gael have performed worse and worse and worse. In fact, in last year's general election, they had their worst result in history. But why? The answer to that question is partly to do with something we touched on earlier in the video. Fine Gael's voter base are elderly, wealthy people. Emphasis on elderly. When a political party relies on an older voter base, they get two things. The first is an almost guaranteed turnout. Older people vote, and the party that they vote for always have that upper hand. But what they also get is the reality that people die, and older people are much better at doing that than younger people are. So when a party focuses solely on the older voter base and essentially ignores the younger one, they risk it all falling apart when those older people eventually move on. Now, of course, that's not the only reason that Fine Gael are consistently losing voters. For generations in this country, people have voted for either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And for most of those years, the right and left wing divide didn't really exist as it does today. So it's quite likely that when Fianna Fáil tanked the economy and Fine Gael alongside Labour introduced severe austerity measures, that a lot of voters just went elsewhere. So here we are in 2025, with some polls showing Fine Gael at a lower level of support than they've been in generations. Now, any political analyst worth their weight would be screaming at the party to start focusing on the younger generations, but instead Fine Gael seems kind of stuck. And the reason for that also goes back to what we touched on earlier. Young people are broke. Many of them are college students, many of them are in low paid jobs, and policies that would help them would alienate Fine Gael's core wealthy voters. And there lies the balance in politics. For generations, Fine Gael have been propped up by older, wealthier voters. And now that those voters are dying off, their vote is beginning to dwindle. But rather than trying to attract new voters or young voters, they kind of just keep doing what they've always done. So what do we know about the future of Fine Gael? Well, one thing we know is that the government policies that have been introduced so far in this term have negatively impacted young people and students. That comes from the inevitable rent increases for student accommodation and now the extra €1,000 a year in student fees. We also know that about halfway through this term, Simon Harris will take over as Taoiseach for Micheál Martin, and then it is quite literally make or break for Fine Gael. If the current policies around rent pressure zones and price hikes don't draw in large-scale investors, Fine Gael are going to be the ones who feel the brunt of that come the next election. Simon Harris had the advantage of being a new leader coming up to the last election. The media portrayed him as this energiser of the party, but as soon as the campaign trail started, he realised that he wasn't as popular with the public as he liked to think. In the next election, he won't have that advantage, and that, coupled with the possibility of a worsening housing crisis, a soaring cost of living crisis, an unpopular Taoiseach, and a dwindling voter base, could spell the end for Fine Gael. Then we come to the political powerhouse of Irish politics. The party who has been in government more times than any other, and the party that leads our government today. As per David Madden's report, we know that Fianna Fáil voters also tend to be a bit older, but unlike Fine Gael, they're spread around more when it comes to income. So whilst Fine Gael appeal to the wealthy, Fianna Fáil tend to stick somewhere around the middle class, with voters who are wealthier and voters who aren't so wealthy. And it's for this reason that Fianna Fáil have been able to hold on to power for so long, but there's more to it than that. Like their government partners, Fianna Fáil are an old, established party, and with that comes the fact that generations of families have voted for one or the other for sheer loyalty. This is something that's often overlooked in Irish politics, but Fianna Fáil have survived largely on their own legacy, if we skip over the financial crash, that is. After the crash, it looked like their days were numbered, and then Micheál Martin came in 2011 and he took the party from the brink of death to the largest party that we have today. But if we take a look at Fianna Fáil's performance throughout the years, we can see that even today, as the largest party in the Dáil, they're still a shell of their former selves. There was a time when Fianna Fáil took more than 50% of the vote share on their own, but over the years that's been gradually getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and in the last election they got less than half of that. In fact, if you take out the election that happened immediately after the crash, 2024 was the worst election that Fianna Fáil have ever had. So it's no surprise that the two Civil War rivals have had no choice but to come together in order to hold on to power. But it does prove that we could very well be witnessing the last days of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So how does it look for Fianna Fáil in the future? Well, they won't struggle as much as Fine Gael when it comes to having an older voter base. And whilst they are introducing policies that will hurt younger generations, younger voters are less likely to punish them in the polls. On top of that, Micheál Martin will step back from the role of Taoiseach a couple of years before the next election, which means that the public are more likely to blame Simon Harris and Fine Gael come election time than Fianna Fáil. With that said, at the current trajectory, Fianna Fáil are set to lose even more votes. And with this government starting off worse than any government I've seen before, they have a lot of work to do to turn the tide. It looks increasingly likely that in order to stay relevant in Irish politics come the next election, Fianna Fáil will have to make some big changes. And one of those changes is the retirement of Micheál Martin. He's already hinted at doing that, and I'd be very surprised if he led Fianna Fáil into another election. So the only way I can really see them hanging on is if they elect a new leader a few months before election time and get the same advantage that Simon Harris got last year. And whilst all this political mess is crumbling down around them, another party has lurked in the shadows for decades and has only recently shown its teeth. That party, as many of you may know, is Sinn Féin. And such is the turbulent nature of Sinn Féin, I will have to make a separate video entirely for them. So as the cool kids say, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to learn more about Irish politics.